Good afternoon.
And routed it by
Hey, Sean.
236.
Well, here,
Oh,
it's
no,
all right.
I ended up driving it and then it turned me left. I followed the Amazon truck and I ended up between.
Sean, can
Pounds of the
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Down in the railroad track. I'm
Get
getting
started,
started,
just
just
talk a little
in
bit,
some
okay.
kind of back view. Over something, when I signed.
Okay. Okay, y'all are on mute now.
All right, we are unmuted, but not, and we are live streaming. I will take our pause, stop sharing.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
Afternoon, Sean. It is 5 o'clock. Well, Mayor, are you good? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll call the June 17th, 2025 meeting of the Strategic Planning Committee to order. Today, we're talking about the CRAs. We had asked last time we discussed this to go back and get additional information. We have attorney Sean Byrne here with us to talk about CRAs. And I don't know where you want to start with this. I take it you got Sean up. We're going to start with Sean.
Yeah, so I think that was the sole purpose of today's meeting. If you recall from the last strategic planning committee meeting, before we proceeded with drafting of any legislation or anything to that end, we just wanted to really have a discussion with Sean, kind of providing additional insight into what the process would look like in sunsetting the pre-94 CRA, moving to a post-94 CRA, and just kind of make him available for questions that you all may have before we then kind of go further in drafting any sort of legislation, things of that nature. So I think, Sean, I know we've had conversations over the last couple of years. I tried to share kind of what the committee had brought forward at the last meeting. So I'll just kind of turn it over to you if you want to talk a little bit about kind of our existing CRA recommendations moving forward, and then some of the questions that the committee had posed related to how we would craft a sunsetting provision.
Sure. So let me start by providing a little bit of an overview. I won't go into too much detail because y'all probably know a lot of this already. But the city currently has two CRAs. They're both pre-94 CRAs. It creates a tremendous opportunity, but there's trade-offs with pre-94 CRAs. So the benefit of a pre-94 CRA is it's 100% abatement. You don't need to do agreements, and there's no other ancillary approvals. So you get 100% abatement without school district approval. Anything, otherwise you can only do 15 years and 75%. under the post 94. So the thing about pre 94 CRAs is you can only amend them twice. And what counts as amendment is limited. So in CRA number one, it's been amended one time. We would need to amend it. If we amend it a second time, that would be the last time we could amend it. And for CRA number two, we were planning to leave it as is and not amend it at all. But that gives us future flexibility if we did want to make changes down the road, or anybody decided that this wasn't the right direction to go, that you would be able to amend that one. The challenge we ran into is that in 2023, state law was amended to clarify that a CRA could only be approved essentially for the territory of the city that existed at the time of the CRA. And the challenge that we had was in 2013, we had passed a resolution that approved CRAs for future annexations. Because of that change in 2023 and that clarification, we want to just button this up and make sure that we amend CRA number one to include all annexed territory as it exists today. And that way we won't have any problems on that. There's a benefit, there's a trade-off, and I just want to kind of highlight this. The pre 94 CRAs are considered very valuable. They're great, except when you want to control what gets developed and you want to have a say in anything. Because a pre-94 CRA, there's no CRA agreement, there's no requirements, there's no job creation requirements or anything like that on the pre-94. There are no agreements at all. On a post-94, on a new CRA, the city would be able to have and decide on what terms and conditions there would be, whether there's a minimum investment requirement, whether there's job requirements on a case-by-case basis, on a project-by-project, location-by-location. And if the city said, gee, we don't think this project really needs this incentive, we're not comfortable providing it, such as a relocation from within the city or something like that. On the other hand, there's really, that provides that extra flexibility, which is one of the benefits why we sometimes see cities going from a pre-94 CRA into post-94 CRA, even though from a developer standpoint, a lot of developers love the pre-94s because they don't have to sign on to anything or agree to anything. So with that bit of background, Mayor Murin had sent me sort of some information, and I guess I'm going to just kind of jump in and make some suggestions on that. So for CRA number one, we're going to want to amend it to include the entire geographic boundary so that we don't have an issue or a concern going forward with CRAs that are, with projects that are underway, and have that concern. And I understand that there's a desire to potentially sunset this. To sunset this, what I would suggest is we would, I very much like the idea that it's, using the has begun vertical construction by some date certain. The concern on this is, and the pros and cons of that are, there were two different options on language. And Mayor, did you share that language with the team?
Yes, that was shared at the last.
So the first part of the language was, they have to complete construction by some date certain and certificate of occupancy. The challenge on that is with a pre-94 CRA, a developer's going to feel, or a company's going to feel entitled to that CRA as long as the CRA exists, because usually if you start construction on it and the program's in place, you think, okay, you don't have to do an agreement or give any notifications. You might be caught off guard or surprised if you have that requirement. Now, if you said, and we're going to put that requirement out 2 or 3 years, okay, that's probably more manageable. On the other hand, on the begin vertical construction, if you wanted to kind of put an end to this soon, you could do the vertical construction by a date certain in the near term and kind of give notice to everybody that, hey, if you want to qualify under this CRA, you're going to need to start vertical construction by this date. And that way, for sure you've cut it off. For sure what projects you have in the queue. And then going forward, you can do, the city would need to do essentially a housing survey and adopt a petition, petition to identify a new CRA area. Could be everything except for CRA number 2, for instance, or it could, but because again, the area is not as critical for a new CRA. In a new CRA, it's always going to be discretionary on the part of city council as to whether to enter into an agreement or not. So normally what you would do is you would do a new post 94 CRA, and then whenever you annex property, you would amend that petition to include that annex property area. But again, there'd be no like, gee, I decided to build a factory here, I get a CRA automatically. No, I'd have to go to the city and say, hey, I want to do this with this project. Will you approve 25%, 50%, 75%, or with school district approval, 100% abatement for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, up to 15 years. And that provides the most flexibility for the city. Because the city then has control over that, and the city can include terms like, you've got to create X number of jobs, and you have to maintain X number, a certain number of jobs, or you have to make a certain level of investment, and that can be in a written agreement that's enforceable between the city and the company. So that's the reason why people kind of look at these and sort of the trade-offs, but it's nice. I will say it is nice. A lot of cities would envy your position of being able to have a sort of a backstop of a CRA from pre-94 that hasn't been amended in case in the future there was a desire to go a different direction, because that one's just going to sit in place indefinitely in its limited area. And I would say just leave it in place. And if there's ever a need to do something different, you have that flexibility.
And just as a reminder, that's a pretty small area, I think, around Cooper, and in that residential neighborhood. So it's a smaller area.
That's number 2.
Yes.
Excuse me, Sean,
Yes.
I'm Jim Stasiak, the city auditor. So if I'm hearing you correctly, tell me if I'm right, if this is correct. If the pre-94 and post-94 exist at the same time, covering the same geographic area, you're saying the developer can just assume and elect or put themselves in the pre-94 automatically? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so that's why usually we don't have these overlap,
Okay.
like at the same time. So what we would do is we would start, you could get the CRA petition, but you would want to end it because they could just elect into it, and there's really not, there's not a way to control that with a pre-94 other than, the geographic area and things like that. There's not a way to control it because it's essentially as of right, and it's essentially 100% as of right for meeting the requirements. And the requirements are pretty loose, new construction, $5,000 remodeling, things like that. So for that reason, the post 94 CRA, the new CRA, provides the city a lot more flexibility to incentivize projects they want and non-incentivize projects they don't want.
And the second question corollary to that then would be, in a requirement, is there any, like I just came out of an RLF meeting where we approved a loan where the average wage of the full-time workers is going to be in excess of $60,000. Could we put a wage requirement in a post 94? In other words, your average wage or your full-time wages shall be X dollars, so that we can, the people coming in our community can actually afford the median house?
Well, absolutely. Those are all things, again, it would be agreement by agreement. I mean, I've seen them where so again, I often represent the other side of this. So I've seen them where we've had to represent in a CRA agreement that we're going to create, X thousand jobs and have a payroll of X hundreds of millions that ends up being, the equivalent of, 100,000 per employee average. I mean, you can do whatever fits the project, but you can do it on a project by project basis. So you might say, look, we're okay with a warehouse coming in paying 50 or 60,000, but if we're getting a manufacturing facility, we want that to average X. And that's really up to the village, up to the city team it's really up to the city team, an economic development team to negotiate that and city council. I've been spent a lot of time with the village earlier today. I apologize. It's up to city council. It's up to city council to determine, whether to approve that or not, and it can be done on a project by project basis.
And if you don't mind, my last question to follow up to that is, for example, we had an employer promises 150 full-time jobs. That was a prominent named employer, good reputation. They got the CRA. Last count on the last check I did, they have 13 full-time jobs. So if they don't honor the agreement, how do you recapture? If the terms are there, how do you recapture? Are you in common pleas court? Where are you at? How do you get your money? Or does it just end?
Well, there are a couple different options. I'll be frank. Usually, most jurisdictions just terminate it and they lose the benefit going forward. But sometimes, if it's really egregious, if it feels more like really egregious and not just sort of the market changed or something happened, you can include clawback provisions in the CRA, and you would just do it. If frankly, we try to avoid that when I represent clients. But you would just send a demand letter, and if they don't pay, you would take them to court, and it's a breach of contract.
Great, thank you.
And to that end, I would also mention, as we discussed at the last meeting, looking at like an income rebate program or different things, as I've been collecting data from different communities, Union County and Marysville. They utilize the CRA where you are both doing kind of income tax incentive, property tax, and you can kind of build it with a little bit of both, depending again on the project. So if they have a large capital upfront, that's one thing, but obviously the long-term goal is more of the income tax driven. And so you can do a little bit of both, and just it again gives you kind of two different tools to be flexible and build those out together.
And the thing about the post 94, you don't have to do it. If you like a project and you think it's a good project, you can incentivize it. And if it's a project you think is not really great for the community, you're not kind of stuck with them having an abatement that you don't want them to have. It's really your call.
So Mary, if we take in our goal then was to amend the first CRA, the first pre-94, to go to the current city limits. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then we put the date on it, which is, hey, if you're not vertical or some determining line in the sand by X date, you can't take advantage of this. And then we sunset from there. And then anything that's already in play under that just dies over time. Correct, Sean?
That's correct. And now I will tell you the downside of using the start of vertical construction by a certain date, you may want to put an outside date in and complete by, like, start by December 31 and complete by 3 or 4 years later, because otherwise my clients would go ahead on the developer side. My clients would go ahead and like, okay, we started vertical construction. So we don't want people gaming the system.
Or vertical with an acknowledgement. Yeah, hey, we know what you're doing, and here's your timeline. That kind of understanding.
Gotcha. So then anything new from that point forward would fall under the new
Correct.
post 94.
And you would need to update the new. Now, please be aware, every time you annex, you're going to have to amend the petition. And you no longer need ODOD approval, but you do need ODOD notice, basically. So you would have to still, when you do your CRA petition going forward, you have to publish it in a newspaper of general circulation for 2 consecutive weeks. And then you have to send it to ODOD, and they have to certify the territory, which basically just means they'll give it a name like CRA number 3 or whatever you want it to be called. And they don't actually scrutinize these or approve them. They just make sure you followed all the steps. It's really check the box. But when you later annex additional property, you're going to have to amend that and go through that process again of doing the approving an amendment to it for the area. and then each project that comes in that you're going to want to, that you're going to want to consider, each project would come in and get an agreement approved after the area has been established, but before they start construction. So here's the other thing is that for the pre-94 CRA, you don't have to tell anybody before you start. You just start, and when you finish, you submit your certifications. For the post 94, you have to get that CRA agreement in place prior to construction. So it takes a little more planning on the part of the businesses and the developers, but it also helps the city know what's coming, as far as economic development. I mean, obviously there's going to be zoning and other, zoning and permitting, but as far as economic development goes, you have to have that agreement signed prior to construction.
Sean, there's no limit on the number of amendments you can make to post 94, correct?
Oh, no limit.
And each individual deal lives by itself.
Yes.
Rob, will this legislation be you and Sean drafting it together, or will it come fully from Sean?
I'm gonna expect these types of projects, it's probably gonna come from Sean, with me just.
Well, I'm talking about the CRA and the sunset language and all that
Correct.
too.
Right, so it's 100% accurate.
Yeah, we would work together to make sure we get exactly the business terms you want, but we'll make sure the legal terms are correct.
Questions from the committee? Sean, one other thing that just was brought up yesterday that I don't recall us ever discussing, when I was talking to another state economic development person, he said something along the lines of any CRA that was put in place that was it abated more than, there's some sort of $2 million cap that then also involved the school. Can you hit on that real quick?
Sure. The way that works is that there's an income tax sharing. If you're generating more than 2 million of income tax, there's an automatic sharing provision if you put a CRA abatement in place without school district consent. So if income tax being generated is more than $2 million, then there's an income tax sharing with the school district if to make up for the school district not getting any revenue on it.
But only if, as part of the CRA agreement, there is a deal related to income tax?
No, it's just literally a sharing to make up for the fact that the city is abating the school district, is keeping the school district from getting money on the deal. It's a way to protect the school district so that when you abate money from them, they still get some revenue on it.
Okay.
When that's triggered, wasn't it was the ratio negotiable, or was it 50-50?
Frankly, it's a sharing, it's a 50-50, but I will tell you it's negotiable, because usually what we recommend to people is that you work with the school district ahead of time and kind of negotiate. Look, we want to be able to do 100% abatements. Here's what we're going to share. Here's like a general formula. Here's what we think would be fair. And then usually a lot of these, frankly, the best ones, if you want to be the most responsive economic development or city possible, it's great to have your school district on the same page with you up front. And that's one of those things where it can be a new negotiation for every deal, but oftentimes it's good to set a framework so that typically you can say, look, here's what the deal is. Are you comfortable with that? So we usually recommend, frankly, for that one that the school district and the city kind of negotiate up front. And it's not because there's, animosity or anything, but it's more about just managing expectations.
Sean, is that an aggregate amount, and does it apply to pre-94 as well?
Does not apply to pre-94.
Okay, so we don't have any issues then here in Finley.
There's no issues as of today. And again, it's one of those where in a lot of jurisdictions, it just depends on the size of the project. I'm just trying to look at the exact language right now on it, because I haven't looked at it in a little while on that language.
It's just a way to safeguard, like you can't just cut the school out of the deal and then get all of the.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it comes down to. Let me see if I can find that language real quick. It's under a different section, so I always have to think about what the section number is because it's under the notice to the school district section. So it's under 5709 point, I want to say 82, but it might be a different one. So I want to grab that language real quick. Compensating school district. So under 5709.82 is the relevant section. And it's not as simple as just, I guess I want to say, it's not as simple as just like an automatic 50-50 sharing. You get to allocate up to 35% to infrastructure costs, and then you have a sharing ratio. So there's a lot involved in it. And that's why a lot of times the municipalities and the school districts just get together and work it out.
Perfect. Other questions? Okay, so I think what I then need from the committee is just support to continue to work with Sean and Feichtner to draft legislation to move towards updating CRA 1 to current boundaries, establishing the sunset process, and then drafting an updated post-94 CRA.
Questions? Committee? Or anybody else for that matter?
Well, my last question for Sean. Sean, is there any downside we haven't discussed to this recommendation? Because it sounds like they're gonna motion to move forward. Do you have any other concerns we should be aware of?
Just that when you do the new CRA, you'll have to do a new housing study to go with it. It's not a big deal. It's, something that cities do all the time, and usually the economic development team handles it themselves. But just to be aware of that. And but no, I mean, I think this is one of those where, given your situation with having two pre-94s, one of which has not been amended at all, you maintain your long-term flexibility, but you also, going forward, have much more control over these projects going forward.
I'd like to submit for consideration, not for discussion, that when that comes up, that we consider requesting a different group that did it from last time. Because there were a lot of serious errors in the last housing study that we got.
To be clear, well, the housing study is different than
Yeah,
the
no.
housing study
Yeah,
that was done previously.
Yeah, I'm aware, but I just think we should consider finding a different group.
Okay. Fair enough. Thank you. Anybody? else? Mayor, would you restate your 2 points?
Yes, do you want me to do them as separate motions or one motion? Because I can make the motion.
I would, one, yes. I was getting there. I was
Okay.
just thinking-
I motion to move forward with drafting the update to the current CRA 1, including sunset provisions, and prepare legal documents for establishing a new post-94 CRA.
And the second thing was, I'm sorry, I got the sunset provisions.
And then
Yeah, drafting a new.
the new
post-94.
post-94 CRA.
Peaceful. Sitting from a finance perspective, I think it's a great opportunity for so maybe you guys for me
Can you speak up just since it's being live streamed?
to establish a little bit more control over what types of corporations are coming in the community, and the type of wages they're going to bring to the community, because that is so vital to us.
And based off of the conversation of the last meeting, I'm getting some additional information on income tax structures, just for us to have some ideas there as well.
So what I've written down from what the mayor said previously is her motion that the administration, we recommend that the administration moves forward with drafting update CRA 1, including the sunset provisions and drafting a new post 1994 CRA. Basic stuff. I'll second that. Discussion. Seeing as there's none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion passes.
Very good. Thank you, Sean. Appreciate it. We'll be in touch.
Sean,
Great,
thank you very
thanks.
much.
Have a good
Appreciate
evening. Bye now.
it.
Yeah.
See ya.
All right. Are we adjourned, Mr. Chairman?
Anything else for the good of the order? Without that, we are adjourned. Thank you all.
All right.
Please make sure you stop and sign.
We'll sign next week.